I'm standing in the middle of the open office when Mr. Dalton's voice explodes like a bomb. "Pack your things. You're done here." His finger jabs toward me like a weapon, and the entire floor goes silent. Someone gasps. Another co-worker flinches. My ears ring with the force of his words. He's smiling, actually smiling like he just won something huge. Like humiliating me is entertainment. But inside my chest, I'm repeating the same sentence over and over like a shield. You already don't work here. He just doesn't know it yet. I look at his face, red and twisted with anger, and something strange happens inside me. I don't feel scared. I don't feel like crying. Instead, I feel something else entirely. Something like certainty. Something like knowing a secret that will change everything. Around me, my co-workers stare with their mouths open. They're waiting to see what I'll do. They're waiting to see if I'll cry or argue or beg. But I just stand there, breathing slowly and deliberately, feeling completely calm while chaos swirls around me. My throat tightens, but I refuse to let tears come. I don't shout back. I don't defend myself. I just breathe, slow, steady, controlled, like I'm in complete command of my own body even though everything around me is falling apart. Dalton's voice keeps booming behind me as I turn toward my desk. He's demanding I hand over my ID badge immediately. He's telling security to watch me. He's explaining to everyone within earshot how incompetent I am, how I've always been a problem, how he's finally done tolerating my presence. I think silently, you're about to choke on your own arrogance. The badge in my pocket suddenly feels heavy, not with weight but with meaning. He doesn't understand what he just did. He doesn't realize that by firing me publicly, dramatically, in front of dozens of witnesses, he's actually destroying himself. He's just committed the biggest mistake of his career, and he's celebrating it. I can see Olivia from HR standing by the conference room door. Her face has gone completely pale. She knows. She understands what's about to happen. Our eyes meet for just a second, and I see panic there. She knows exactly what Dalton has just done wrong. She knows what comes next. As everyone stares at me, standing in the middle of this moment that will change everything, I say silently to myself the words that will define this entire story. My boss fired me in front of everyone. He didn't know my resignation letter went in yesterday. That simple sentence contains everything. It holds the secret I've been keeping for the past 24 hours. It holds the reason why his rage and his dramatic firing means absolutely nothing to me. It holds the proof that I already made my escape before he even knew I wanted to leave. This is the moment where everything shifts. This is where my quiet victory becomes real. This is where Dalton's dramatic display becomes his own downfall instead of mine. I grab my small box from under my desk and begin placing my personal items inside. My coffee mug from my favorite restaurant. Photo of my family. A plant that has somehow survived on my desk for 3 years. These are the only things I own here. The rest, my job, my title, my position in this company, already belongs to someone else now. Or rather, it belongs to no one. Because I don't work here anymore. My name is Madison Reeve. I'm 32 years old, born and raised in Colorado, and I've spent the last 5 years working as a project coordinator for Apex Solutions, a mid-sized software company with offices in downtown Denver. I used to love this job. I used to walk through these doors and feel excited about the day ahead. I used to believe this was my career, my path, my future. Then Dalton arrived as the new department manager 8 months ago, and everything changed. He changed the tone of the entire office immediately, favoring loud confidence over quiet competence. He brought with him a style of leadership that made noise and demanded attention. He would walk through the halls speaking loudly on his phone. He would interrupt meetings to share his opinions. He made sure everyone knew he was in charge, whether they wanted to know it or not. I remember the first day he came to our department. I prepared a presentation about our current projects and our workflow. I was excited to show him what we were doing well and where we could improve. I thought he would appreciate my preparation and my dedication. I thought we would work well together. I was so wrong about everything. It started small, which is how the worst things always start. During my first meeting with Dalton, I suggested a new project management system that could help us track deliverables more efficiently. It was an idea I'd been developing for months, based on research and best practices from other companies. I was proud of it, thought it was good. Dalton called it cute. "That's a cute idea," he said, with a smile that wasn't really a smile. "But let's hear something more substantial, something that shows real innovation." The room went cold. I could feel my co-workers shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Everyone suddenly became very interested in their laptops and notebooks. I felt my face burn with embarrassment, even though my idea was solid, even though it was actually good. 2 weeks later, Dalton's favorite employee, Kyle, a salesman who barely understood the technical side of our work, suggested almost the exact same system in a different meeting. He presented it like he'd invented it himself. He spoke with confidence and copied my research without giving me credit. Dalton stood up and called it visionary. He called it the kind of forward thinking we need. He told Kyle he was exactly the kind of leader the company needed. He announced they would implement Kyle's idea immediately. My idea. Kyle's credit. Dalton's praise. The story of my life at Apex Solutions. Over the months that followed, I began to understand the real structure of Dalton's leadership. It wasn't actually about who did the best work. It was about who got the loudest credit for the work. It was about who could perform confidence most convincingly. It was about who was Dalton's favorite. And I was not Dalton's favorite. I handled all the invisible work. The difficult coordination tasks that nobody celebrated. The vendor communication that required patience and detail. The data cleanup that nobody noticed. The crisis calls at 9 o'clock at night when something broke and needed immediate fixing. I didn't complain. I just did the work quietly and professionally, the way I'd always done everything. But Dalton took advantage of this. He loaded me with more and more of this quiet work while giving Kyle the flashy presentations and client-facing meetings. Kyle would get invited to important lunches. Kyle would present to senior leadership. Kyle would receive bonuses and praise. Meanwhile, I would finish Kyle's reports at midnight while he slept. I would clean up his mistakes. I would make sure his presentations looked perfect. And then people would congratulate him for deliverables I'd spent nights finishing. Became invisible. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a Tuesday night when our entire database synchronization system failed. This was a critical problem that could cost the company thousands of dollars per hour if we didn't fix it quickly. Clients couldn't access their information. Everything stopped. I received the emergency call at 10:47 p.m. Dalton was calling. His voice panicked and desperate. "Fix it," he said. "Fix it now. I don't care what you have to do. Just make it work again." I drove to the office in my pajamas with a jacket over them. I spent until 1 in the morning identifying the problem, a corrupted data bridge that needed complete reconstruction. I rebuilt the entire system from backup files. I tested every connection. At 1:03 a.m., everything came back online. The crisis was over. I had prevented what could have been a disaster. I had saved the company potentially thousands of dollars. I had solved the problem that nobody else could solve. The next morning, Dalton called an emergency all-hands meeting. I walked in feeling good, expecting maybe some recognition for my work. I had proof I'd fixed the problem. I had documentation showing how I'd solved it. I had evidence that I'd prevented things from being 10 times worse. Dalton blamed me for the failure. He stood in front of the entire department and told everyone that the system had gone down because of poor maintenance. He implied it was my fault. He said I needed to be more careful with the technical infrastructure. He said nothing about the fact that I'd fixed it. He waved away my documented evidence like lint on his sleeve and moved on to praising Kyle for staying calm during the crisis. Kyle had gone home and slept. That was the moment. That was the exact moment when something shifted inside me. Not loudly but quietly. Not with anger but with clarity. It was like watching a light switch flip in my mind. Everything suddenly made sense. Everything suddenly became obvious. I couldn't work for this man anymore. I couldn't spend my days being invisible. I couldn't keep sacrificing my talents and my time for someone who didn't value me. I couldn't continue working somewhere that my competence actually worked against me, that my quiet professionalism was seen as weakness, that my inability to perform confident arrogance was somehow a personal flaw. The next afternoon, Dalton called me into his office. I thought maybe he wanted to discuss something work-related. Instead, he said something that burned itself into my brain forever. "Maybe this role is too demanding for someone of your temperament," he said, looking at me like I was a problem he needed to solve. He said temperament like it was a character flaw, like there was something wrong with the way I approached my job, like being calm and professional and detailed was somehow a weakness instead of a strength. I went home that day and I shook, not in anger but in absolute clarity. I knew exactly what I needed to do. I wasn't going to quit in a normal way. I was going to do something smarter. That night, I drafted the cleanest, most precise resignation letter of my entire life. I used every ounce of professionalism I possessed. I wrote it without a single emotional word. I wrote it without a single accusation. I wrote it without giving him anything to use against me. It was a masterpiece of professional restraint. I wrote, "I am writing to formally notify you of my resignation from my position as project coordinator at Apex Solutions, effective immediately. My last day of employment is tomorrow, November 15th. I will return all company equipment and complete the necessary paperwork during business hours. Thank you for the opportunities I've had during my time with the company." That was it. Nothing more. Nothing less. Just bulletproof professionalism that nobody could argue with or challenge. I submitted it directly to Olivia in HR, not to Dalton. I wanted documentation. I wanted proof. Within 2 hours she called me back. "Madison, we've approved your resignation. Your exit processing is scheduled for 3 p.m. tomorrow. You'll need to return your badge, laptop, and any other company property. After that, you're officially free." My last day was tomorrow. After tomorrow, I would no longer be an employee of Apex Solutions. Dalton just didn't know it yet. I walked into the office the next morning with an odd sense of peace that I'd never felt before. I knew something that nobody else knew. I carried a secret that gave me power. Dalton didn't know. Carl didn't know. Nobody in the office knew. Technically, I was already a visitor. I was no longer an employee. My employment status had been terminated the moment Olivia approved my resignation. I was just a former employee coming in to complete paperwork and return equipment. I was a ghost walking through a building that no longer owned any part of me. The feeling was strange and wonderful. I went to my desk and began organizing my personal items. I had 3 hours before my exit processing at 3 p.m. 3 hours to be in this office that was no longer my workplace. 3 hours to wait and see what would happen. 3 hours before my complete escape from Dalton's management. What I didn't know was that Dalton was about to do something incredibly stupid. But Dalton didn't wait until 3 p.m. He beat me to the punch by about 2 hours. Around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, he stormed into my workspace like a hurricane. His face was already red with anger. "You missed the client's sync call," he shouted, loud enough for the entire floor to hear. His voice carried the kind of rage that scared people. I hadn't missed any call. I had been at my desk. I had received no notification about a call. I looked at my calendar. Nothing there. I looked at my emails. Nothing about any sync call. Kyle had missed the call. Kyle was the one who was supposed to coordinate with the client. Kyle was the one who had the call on his calendar. Kyle was the one who'd simply forgotten about it and left early for lunch. But Dalton blamed me anyway. He blamed me loudly and publicly, raising his voice enough for the entire floor to hear. He made sure everyone knew I'd messed something up. He made sure everyone saw him showing his authority and his anger. He was performing, and his performance required a victim. He chose me. People looked terrified for me. Everyone stared at their screens and tried to be invisible. Then something snapped inside Dalton. Maybe it was the fact that I didn't cry or argue. Maybe it was the fact that I just looked at him calmly while he raged. Maybe he realized that his anger wasn't actually affecting me. Maybe that made him even more angry. He exploded. "You're fired, Madison," he screamed, and the words filled the entire office. "You're done here. You're incompetent. You're a disaster. Security, come get this person out of my building." He yelled it like a slap. He loved the power. He loved the audience. He loved the fact that everyone was looking. He loved showing everyone that he was the boss and I was nothing. It was pure self-inflicted stupidity, and he was proud of it. My heart should have been racing. I should have been panicking. I should have been embarrassed or angry or devastated. Instead, I felt calm. Because he just fired someone who no longer worked here. He just terminated someone who'd already quit. He'd just proven my point about why I needed to leave. One of my friends, Marcus, a fellow coordinator who sat 2 desks away, whispered urgently, "Should we tell him?" I shook my head and whispered back, "Let him burn himself." At that exact moment, Olivia from HR stepped out of a conference room. She'd heard the commotion. She'd heard Dalton screaming at me. She'd heard the firing that had already happened once yesterday, on a piece of paper in her filing cabinet. Her face went completely slack with panic and recognition. She knew. She absolutely knew what was happening here. She understood that Dalton had just violated every protocol in the company handbook. She looked directly at me and mouthed silently so nobody else could see. "He's digging his own grave." I nodded back just slightly. Everything was going exactly according to plan, except the plan hadn't actually been mine. The plan was Dalton's. I was just standing here and watching him execute it perfectly. Dalton stormed over to my desk, his face purple with rage. "Give me your badge," he demanded. His voice still loud, still performing for the audience of coworkers who were desperately trying to look like they weren't watching. "Give it to me right now." I simply reached into my pocket, pulled out my badge, and placed it carefully on my desk. He snatched it like he'd won something massive. Like taking my badge proved something about his authority. Like this moment was his victory. He didn't understand what he'd just done. What he didn't understand was that security cameras had captured his entire performance. What he didn't understand was that Olivia from HR had witnessed the entire thing. What he didn't understand was that he'd just committed wrongful termination against someone who was no longer technically under his employment. Olivia's eyes had widened to twice their normal size. I could see her mentally calculating the legal implications. I could see her understanding that Dalton had just created a documented case of termination that violated company protocol because the person he'd fired had already quit the day before. This badge in his hand wasn't proof of his power. It was evidence of his mistake. Olivia pulled Dalton aside, and they had a conversation I couldn't hear. Dalton came back red-faced and confused, like he didn't understand why his action wasn't being celebrated. Then Olivia told him he needed to come with her and HR to a formal meeting immediately. Dalton tried to glare at me, but the power dynamic had already shifted. He tried to maintain his authority, but it was already slipping away like sand. As they walked toward the HR office, I saw Olivia pull out her phone. She was calling legal. She was documenting the timeline. Dalton still didn't realize what he'd done. He had no idea how bad this was about to get. Over the next 48 hours, HR began a complete audit of Dalton's management practices. My resignation file triggered an investigation. My documentation of how I'd fixed the database proved I could do complex work. My resignation letter's professional tone contrasted sharply with Dalton's volatile behavior. HR dug deeper. They discovered things that made the legal team nervous. They found altered review notes in personnel files. They found missing documentation. They identified favoritism patterns in project assignments. They discovered misallocations of overtime funds connected to Kyle's unearned bonuses. The investigators looked at emails and found messages between Dalton and Kyle discussing project assignments before official announcements. They found that Kyle had been given easier projects while difficult work was assigned to others. They found performance reviews that had been changed after they were originally written. Dalton's management style was systematically unethical. The legal team started making phone calls. They brought in an outside investigator. They documented everything. Each discovery led to another. The audit expanded to look at how Dalton had handled other employees. They discovered complaints from people who had left, complaints never properly investigated. They found a pattern of behavior going back years. Kyle approached me 2 days after Dalton's performance. He looked pale and scared. He pulled me into an empty conference room, away from other people's eyes. "Did you report him?" Kyle asked, his voice shaking. "No," I said truthfully. "I just resigned." "Then why is HR asking about the budget reports? Why are they asking about project assignments? Why do they want to know about the bonuses?" I just shrugged. Kyle's face went white. He could see the dominoes falling. He understood his comfortable position had been built on unethical practices. He knew HR was investigating. "Is this going to destroy my career?" he asked quietly. I thought about all the nights I'd stayed late finishing his work. I thought about all the projects he'd taken credit for. I thought about all the bonuses he'd received while I got nothing. "I don't know," I said finally. "But you need to be honest with them now." Kyle left looking like he'd aged 10 years. Meanwhile, HR was interviewing every member of the department. They asked about work conditions and how projects were assigned. People were finally talking, quietly at first, then more freely. Stories emerged about Dalton's behavior that painted a clear picture of systematic mismanagement. Stories about promises made and broken. Stories about unreasonable demands and sudden mood swings. Stories about how he treated different employees differently based on favoritism. Marcus described how Dalton had humiliated him for suggesting an idea, then praised Kyle for the same idea the next week. Jasmine explained how she'd been passed over for promotions while Kyle had been given opportunities despite less experience. Other complaints resurfaced. Things people had tried to report before but were ignored. Now they mattered because there was a pattern forming. Dalton tried to intimidate some of the people being interviewed. He tried to control the narrative by reaching out to people and asking them not to talk. Big mistake. Every attempted intimidation was reported to HR. Every phone call asking someone not to talk became additional evidence. The investigation grew bigger by the day. Within a week, Dalton was removed from 2 major projects. Senior leadership was notified. He was told to take administrative leave while everything was reviewed. His access to company systems was restricted. His email was being monitored. He tried to blame me somehow. He sent emails claiming my resignation was connected to a grudge against him. He tried to frame the investigation as retaliation. But I was already gone. I'd already moved on. I'd already started transferring my 401k. I'd already begun interviewing with other companies. I'd already erased myself from Apex Solutions except for the documented record of my resignation. My resignation letter, that perfect professionalism, destroyed every narrative he tried to spin. The timeline proved I'd quit before he'd fired me. There were no emotional emails from me. There was nothing that could be twisted to support his claims. I was no longer his problem. But Dalton was becoming everyone's problem. The legal team started looking at whether they had grounds to pursue action against Dalton. They calculated the financial cost of his mismanagement. They determined whether there was evidence of intentional fraud. The final HR meeting lasted 3 hours. I didn't attend it, but everyone in the office could sense its importance. It involved Dalton, HR, legal, and senior leadership. The conference room door stayed closed the entire time. When Dalton finally left that meeting, he looked hollow. He looked like someone had scooped out his insides and replaced them with nothing. He didn't return to his office. Security did. They were there to collect his personal items. He left the building that day without speaking to anyone. 3 days later, an all-staff email came out from the CEO. It was short and formal. Effective immediately, Mr. Dalton is no longer with the company. We are committed to maintaining a workplace culture based on integrity and respect. Further information will be available during departmental meetings. No farewell message. No thank you note. No explanation. Just a sterile termination announcement that told everyone he was gone and nobody would miss him. I heard later that when the email went out, people actually applauded in their cubicles. Not loudly or officially, but quietly. People who had suffered under Dalton's management, who had been scared and frustrated and undervalued, quietly celebrated that he was finally gone. Investigation revealed that Dalton had misused company discretionary funds to sponsor Kyle's leadership development program. This sounded professional. In reality, it was expensive coaching sessions Kyle didn't need, paid for by company money that wasn't supposed to be used that way. The investigators found invoices for executive coaching from a company that specialized in C-level executives. Kyle wasn't a C-level executive. They found receipts for luxury hotel stays labeled as training conferences. They found spa treatment charges categorized as wellness and stress management for employee development. The pattern was clear. Dalton was using company money to give Kyle special treatment that violated company policy. Leadership found this unethical. The legal team found it potentially fraudulent. It was the nail in Dalton's coffin. 2 weeks later, Kyle received a severance package and resigned. He didn't even try to defend himself. He knew his comfortable position had been built on corruption and favoritism, not merit. He decided to find employment elsewhere. The department was finally free. Meanwhile, the company I'd secretly interviewed with had been waiting for me. I'd gone through 3 rounds of interviews. They'd been impressed by my calmness and competence. They'd wanted me to start immediately, but I told them I needed to leave my position the right way. I need to handle my resignation properly, I'd explained. I don't want to burn bridges or leave things in chaos. They understood and agreed to wait for me. The day after Dalton left the building, they called with an official offer. A senior project coordinator position. Higher pay. Better hours. A director who valued competence. A team that seemed genuinely kind. Accepted immediately. My first week felt like I'd stepped into a different universe. People listened to my ideas. My suggestions were implemented. My work was recognized. My manager said thank you when I finished projects. Nobody tried to take credit for my work. Nobody undermined me in meetings. It was incredible how different work could feel when you weren't being systematically undervalued. Within the first 3 days, my supervisor asked for my input on a major project. Within the first week, I was invited to present at a client meeting. Within the first 2 weeks, my contributions were publicly acknowledged in a team meeting. This was what work was supposed to feel like. 2 months into my new job, I heard through a former coworker that Dalton had applied for a position at a partner company. He was trying to rebuild his career somewhere else. HR at that company contacted my new employer asking for a reference. My HR team responded with documented facts only. They noted that there had been an investigation into his management practices and his termination due to policy violations. They didn't lie. They didn't exaggerate. They just told the truth. Dalton wasn't hired for the position. Every company he applied to would make the same discovery. Every reference check would reveal what had happened. His reputation in the industry was damaged by his own documented actions. I felt a strange sense of peace knowing that the system worked. The truth wasn't suppressed. The facts simply spoke for themselves. That's when I truly understood what had happened. I hadn't fought Dalton. I had simply walked away professionally, and the truth caught up with him naturally. Justice didn't require me to do anything. Here's what I learned from all of this. Dalton's downfall was powered entirely by his own ego and his own actions. I didn't fight him. I didn't expose him. I didn't plot anything. I simply walked away, silently, strategically, with complete dignity and tact. And because he tried to crush me publicly and arrogantly, he ended up crushing himself instead. The strongest revenge isn't actually revenge at all. It's success. It's moving on. It's building a better life somewhere else. It's being so professional that when someone tries to make you the villain, nobody believes them. I won because I left. I won because I refused to engage in his drama. I won because I was always the professional one in the room. And eventually that professionalism was recognized and valued. Sometimes the best move isn't to fight back loudly. Sometimes the best move is to simply walk away and let people like Dalton destroy themselves through their own arrogance. I did exactly that. And I've never been happier. If this story taught me anything, it's that success isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's knowing something that other people don't. Sometimes it's the peace that comes from walking toward something better instead of fighting against something worse. That's the real victory. The real justice. And I finally had it. You don't need to destroy people who hurt you. You just need to refuse to be destroyed by them. Maintain your integrity. Document your professionalism. Walk away knowing you did everything right. The rest will take care of itself. The truth will catch up. Justice will find its way. And you'll be somewhere better, with people who value you, building a life that's better than anything your previous situation could have offered. That's the lesson Dalton's arrogance gave me.